Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 64 of the IoT For All Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Schouten, and today's podcast is actually brought to you by one of our partners, Softtek Development Corp, a global full-stack development company specializing in designing and building smart connected devices and Internet of Things solutions. Fortune 500 tech companies and startups alike trust Softtek to deliver end-to-end solutions for complex connected devices. Softtek solves even the most challenging engineering problems, so make sure you visit softtek.com for more details. That's SOFTEQ.com. We at IoT For All are big fans of Softtek, and we appreciate their time and support and being a big avid member of our community and helping us bring this podcast to you. So with that being said, our guest today is actually Christopher Schouten, the Senior Director of Product Marketing for the Kudelski Group. He joins me today to talk about important security considerations for both new and existing IoT deployments and how to plan for the long term, some of the biggest challenges companies and IoT products face in terms of security, and some of the things driving the evolution of IoT security both this year and beyond. For those of you unfamiliar with the Kudelski Group, they are the perfect company for IoT device manufacturers who need to protect their connected businesses and enable new business models. As you all know, IoT security is a highly important topic for the IoT industry as a whole. I think Christopher sheds a lot of very good light on very important items regarding IoT security that I hope you find value in. So without further ado, please enjoy this episode with Christopher Schouten of the Kudelski Group. Welcome, Christopher, to the IoT For All podcast. How are things going on your end?
Great, Ryan. We're living in interesting times, are we not?
We are. It is a very unique world right now. Eager to hear how these states that are starting to come out of it handle things and personally, obviously, what's happening for us here in Maryland, and how things change over the next number of weeks. But it's been a very, very unique journey for the last 2 months, for sure.
Yeah, it has. We don't know exactly where it's going to end up, but I think the key is stay connected, stay hopeful.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. So I know after our recording today, they're actually our governor's doing another talk. So I think they're starting to lay the groundwork for a plan to kind of ease out of this, hopefully at a controlled rate that will allow us to get back to relatively normal life. So fingers crossed there.
Yeah, and that's something we're eager to help with in any way we can with our technology and knowledge.
Absolutely. Yeah. But no, it's great to have you. I'd love to kind of start out by having you give a quick introduction about yourself, talk about your background, experience, things that may be relevant to our audience to kind of get a sense of who you are.
Sure. So my name is Christopher Schouten. I'm just starting on the second half of life, past 50. Originally born in the U.S., but I've lived in half my life in Europe and half my life in the U.S. and then back again after 20 years and loving living in the beautiful Arizona sun. My educational background is in mass communications, journalism, and linguistics, but somehow I ended up in the technology field at the very beginning of my career in telecommunications. And for anyone who's old enough to remember the company MCI, and I've never looked back since then. And I've spent the last 20 years in essentially the digital security business. First, looking at how you secure pay TV revenue streams, which is a $200 billion business in the world and changing very rapidly. And then for the last 3 or 4 years, looking specifically at how in Kudelski we can use our long 30-year plus experience in protecting high-value business models in the IoT space as well, because to our quick surprise a couple of years ago, we found out that many of the principles are very much the same. So yeah, that's my background. I'm an avid IoT enthusiast. My entire home, which is relatively new, is wired to the gills, and so I love using it as well as working on it.
That's fantastic. Yeah, the last couple episodes we've actually recorded have been about smart homes and talking about just the evolution of the smart home market. So it's kind of cool that you're a big adopter of that and have your house wired up that much. That's pretty cool.
And funny enough, that is actually one of the markets where the security today is sort of the scariest. So,
I bet. I bet. It's I think when Andrew Howard was on the first time, we talked a lot about that. Just kind of the risks associated with more of the consumer facing products that are going to be put in your home. We were talking, I believe, about security cameras, but that are from China and the risk there. across the board, kind of talking about those different kinds of those topics. But yeah, I completely understand how the smart home space is such a high risk and a kind of a scary place to kind of be involved in. But I'm sure you all are obviously very aware of that and, involved in that space some capacity as well.
Well, we hope to help companies that are, sort of in a rush to market in a very innovative space right now, sort of slow down and consider a little bit more carefully
Absolutely.
what long-term implications are of implementing and secure devices, and really considering not just how do I get something to market as quickly as possible, but how can I use security as a value proposition for end customer. Say, hey, listen, you buy my device, not only is it cool and does a lot of cool things, but it's also really secure. And I think that, we hope to see that starting to be printed on boxes that you can buy at big retailers in the future at some point, because consumers, I think, are wanting that.
Very cool. Yeah, that's great. So at Kudelski, I want to get into Kudelski a little bit more in a second here, but at Kudelski, your role I have it as Senior Director of IoT Product Marketing. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct. So,
okay.
I'm responsible together with a large team of incredibly bright people to sort of define the proposition for the market.
Okay.
So listening to our customers, listening to our partners, understanding what it is the market needs, and then building it and delivering it.
So what are you seeing kind of right now as the biggest need on the security front when it comes to IoT?
So it's sort of split a little bit in two. We're working with a lot of customers who are incredibly mature in their thinking about security, many of them in the industrial space, increasingly also in the tracking and monitoring space. And the two of those are also very tightly interwoven. We see a blurring of the lines of industries, applications, use cases. It's not at all linear. Everybody's doing a little bit of everything because anytime you can get data, it's good for business. So there's those customers who are incredibly well informed, and they realize they don't have the expertise in house to secure devices by design, which is essentially what we help them do, and ensure that they're secure for the entire product lifecycle from launch to end of life. So they come to us, and we've had 30 plus years experience of embedding security technologies, roots of trust, to establish strong identities and devices that become then the foundation for all of the IoT use cases that people want to build on top of, like encrypt this data from device all the way to the application, and not just over the network, which is what a lot of people are doing. Enable on a connected car a cool new feature that someone has to pay for in order to activate, and then make sure that no one can game that or commit fraud against that functionality. So there's all these different critical device protection, data protection, access control kind of functionalities that we're enabling with our technology with those customers who sort of know what they need. But the other sort of segment that we're finding is people are coming to us out of a lot of innocence and integrity and say, I know I need to be worrying about security, but I don't know where to begin. I've got a really cool product. We think it's going to be very successful in the market, but where to start? And security knowledge is scarce in the market, cybersecurity and IoT security, especially on the embedded side. So can you help? So what we've really tried to do for those customers is to build an entire journey. We announced yesterday a collaboration with ET which is a IoT consultancy company, to do design sprints with customers who don't have completely validated product ideas yet, and really want to make sure that they're connecting the technological capabilities with the real business needs, which is where, according to Microsoft, 30% of IoT projects never pass the POC phase because they just aren't validated from a business perspective. So customers who are new on a journey, we're helping them do that. And if they need help designing security into a product, our IoT Security Center of Excellence has security architecture specialists who can help them do that. If they have devices where they say, hey, can you help us test this out and help us find any gaps that might exist and improve our security posture, then we can do that at our labs in Switzerland. And then only then do we get into the technology piece that we talked about earlier. And then ultimately, the next phase of that journey is, how do I keep that secure for the long run through cybersecurity monitoring.
Gotcha. So to kind of pull on a little bit of what you just mentioned about security and designing it into IoT products, can you talk a little bit more in detail about how you all go about that, or how you approach designing security into IoT products, and maybe also touch on where people currently are overlooking security being implemented into IoT development lifecycle? We know it's super important, but I imagine there are different places where it's maybe more important and people overlook it and don't consider it to the level they should. And just the overall kind of idea on how to design that into a product, and maybe the approach you all take.
Yeah, of course. Well, I think people are afraid that when they look for help to go build a secure IoT solution, that they're going to get a solution that's overscaled for what they need. Because not everyone needs Fort Knox. So any good IoT security journey starts with a really solid threat assessment of what do you as a business hope to accomplish with your connected product? What are you afraid of? What's going to cause you to fail? What are the critical assets that you want to protect? So any good process starts with sitting down across the table, and for us just listening and asking the right questions to understand what the customer's perspective is there. Once we know the things that need to be protected, then we can design a system around saying, all right, we don't need to build Fort Knox. We need to build something that makes sure that data is encrypted end to end, and that you've got authenticated firmware over-the-air updates, and that your device has built-in countermeasures that can be deployed when and if there's ever a security breach. So it's like a sushi menu. You got to pick the things and the use cases and the abilities that you need for your business, but not just now, also in the future. So it requires a little bit of forward thinking as well. So that's our normal approach with a new customer, is to sit down and really listen and understand what they need, and then design the system that's right for them.
So when organizations kind of run into security problems down the line, is there usually a common area in which, or common reason as to why they may overlook security in their development? Is it something to do with just the ignorance to security and understanding how it fits in, or is it something to do with cost? What, from your experience, when companies come to you to kind of work on this, that maybe have already built a product and are looking to now fit security in, what is usually the common reason that it's overlooked in the beginning?
So we can answer that question really easily, because we pull literally dozens of products through our labs doing security assessments every year from every conceivable vertical, whether it be telco, medical, industrial, smart cities, whatever it may be. And so we see a strong trend towards, on the very simple side, people using hardware that has built-in security features that aren't even activated. So that's really the low-hanging fruit that we see for a lot of people, is use the security features that are available to you in the hardware that you're sourcing and the components for your product, like your MCU, like your communications module if you're using a cellular modem or something of that nature. So take advantage of that stuff. Some of the other stuff has to do with how people are dealing with the storage of keys and certificates. That's very often done in an insecure fashion, which opens them up to potential compromise in the future. And then I would say the third major area that they don't consider is, what's the long-term play? If there's anything that we've learned from 30 plus years of success in the pay TV business, it's that security is a cat and mouse game with hackers. And you always have to be one step ahead, and you have to keep your eye on the ball. And so that's why we offer a very strong managed security service component as an option to what we do, that makes sure that we help customers sustain their success over time.
Right. Okay. Very interesting. So if you were to kind of describe to somebody right now the current state of IoT security, how would you do that?
So I think it really varies radically per industry or vertical that we're talking about in application.
Okay.
Like we started out the conversation, there seems to be some lack of consideration for this in the consumer space, because that's a very fast moving market with a lot of sourcing from the Far East, with a lot of innovation and a fast pace of development, and pretty cutthroat. And unfortunately, one of the things people can shortcut in that environment is security. But there is a really strong business case to be made for how that can be a really serious threat to long-term revenues and company reputation, because we see news every day more and more stories about someone listening into somebody else's baby monitor, or somebody hacking the brakes of a Jeep via the Bluetooth stack. And those are only going to become more common. So consumer is a problem, and that's something that we hope to help companies realize the importance needs to be addressed. But if we're looking at where the hotspots for security are right now, those are changing a little bit with COVID-19, to be honest. What COVID-19 has really shown us is in critical circumstances, but even just in daily business, you have to know where your stuff is and what its condition is and how much of it you have. And in this case, we're talking about medical equipment, pharmaceuticals, medical consumables, things of this nature. They need to be tracked. They need to be monitored. According to the World Health Organization, there's a ridiculous amount of drugs and medicines that go to waste because they're not stored under the correct conditions, especially including temperature and humidity. So there's a lot that IoT can do to help that out. And all of that has to be secure as well, because we're talking about integrity and confidentiality of the data, but we're also talking about product authenticity. And that's something that we really anticipate is going to potentially become a big driver going forward, especially in the pharmaceutical space, is this vaccine or is this treatment drug authentic? Is it from the manufacturer that it purports that it came from? Has it been stored under the correct circumstances during the entire life cycle of the product up until use? So these are some interesting areas of development we're keeping an eye on.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see how COVID-19 plays a role in IoT as a whole, but also on the security front, kind of what changes are made and what kind of things are realized during this pandemic to encourage change in certain areas. So it'll be very interesting to see kind of how we come out of it as an industry, and what kind of solutions are built, what kind of approaches are made, what kind of approaches are changed, and just things on how things are done in a different manner because of everything we're learning and going through at the moment.
And I'm getting a little bit esoteric here, but I think in times of prosperity and when things are going really well, we tend to take on projects that are speculative sometimes in nature and might not be fully grounded in real consumer or business demand. But when times like this come along, the thing about it that sort of excites me is that the customer requirements start to become very clear very quickly. It makes it possible for companies like ours to really focus on, okay, this is a clear problem that we can help people solve. Let's do that. So that's why we're putting an increasing focus now also in the medical, pharmaceutical equipment and supply space, together with others like Core Connect here in Arizona, who are building these flexible tracking tags that we help them secure in order to track all these things.
Yeah, we know the guys at Core Connect well. They're friends of ours.
Ours too. Good folks.
Yeah, good people. Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked a little bit about this already, but I wanted to kind of dive in a little bit further. So we talked about kind of why people are overlooking security in IoT solutions, IoT products, and so forth. But how would you define kind of the biggest challenges with IoT security right now? Like maybe view it more from your side of things. Like what are the biggest challenges you guys encounter when working with customers, or just even as a view of the whole from a market perspective, where you're seeing the biggest challenges in terms of IoT security?
So I think the first and most logical question that people ask is, how am I going to integrate security into my product? Especially if they haven't asked the question early enough, they might have a mature design, and that might give them issues. And so what we've learned in order to respond to that integration challenge is to really create security in a variety of different form factors that can meet people wherever they're at in their design process. And that requires a lot of good partnership work. And luckily, we've got a lot of great partners. And so the approach we've taken to that is, all right, so you've built a device, you're going to integrate a cellular or LoRa or multi-WAN modem in it.
Right.
Well, why don't we work with modem manufacturers like our partners at uBlocks to integrate IoT security into that component? And then that's one less thing that people have to integrate. And it's one step closer to making IoT simple and secure. And what if we could integrate a eSIM stack into that same device? Well, then you've removed another component. You've allowed for more miniaturization. You're solving the integration problem even more easily. There's other things like integration into SIM cards, for instance, which whether they be physical SIM cards or eSIMs or iSIMs, that's a secure element where we can include our security stack and root of trust in a well-protected space to drive all these IoT use cases.
Okay.
We've also found it necessary to build a standalone secure element so that if someone comes along and says, I have an IoT device, my design is mature, I'm not going to change any of my other suppliers. Do you have something that you can offer me that I can just smack next to the MCU on a circuit board and have that drive all my security? Well, we can do that too. So it's about diversity in order to generate device reach.
Okay.
So that's one aspect. Another really key aspect is if I'm a company, I'm not going to use the same chipset for the rest of my life. I want some freedom, choice about how I can go out and select the best solution for me in any given moment. And so any of these other solutions that customers are considering that are, you can only use this specific core, or you can only use this specific set of chips, that creates limitations that the customers might suffer from in the future. So we have a very open approach to whom we integrate with in order to give freedom of choice on the chipset and device side, but then also on the cloud side as well, because nobody wants to be locked into a single supplier on that side or on the cloud side and then have to have multiple security solutions as a result of that. So I think people are looking for solutions that are simple, that don't need to employ multiple vendors to do the same thing. And that's really our goal, is to make that possible.
Okay. Very interesting. So with all that being said, when you're thinking kind of long-term with IoT, I know it's not always a short-term kind of thought process or vision for most customers, and for you all, obviously, and particularly, what kind of considerations long-term do you all think are important to be thinking about and considering, or are you thinking about and considering when it comes to IoT security?
So indeed, it's a long-term game. Our goal is to really help shift the mindset away from cybersecurity on its own as being the be-all and end-all for protection of IoT. Cybersecurity tends to take a slightly more network-to-edge-based approach, and we have all these devices out there that are producing data and that are in the wild and are vulnerable. So really, the bottom-up approach is one that's important long-term for companies, especially IoT device manufacturers, to take into account. Long-term, I think we can't ignore the process of standardization that's going on in the industry. So companies like Deutsche Telekom and their NewSIM initiative, which we've jumped onto. The GSMA on the mobile side has published some guidelines for an idea that they call IoT Safe, which is essentially what we discussed earlier, including a root of trust on a SIM card. So we're paying very close attention to those emerging standards and embracing them, while at the same time continuing the sort of pace of innovation that can happen as
very cool.
Business.
So as far as the kind of customers you interact with, can you take me through what a typical kind of customer engagement looks like? I assume companies are coming to you at all different stages of their development cycle with their product, but what does a typical kind of engagement look like for you all when dealing with a customer?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And your observation is absolutely correct. We have to be able to meet people where they're at. We're not a component supplier. So when people don't come to us and say, I want to buy this widget from you, they come to us and they say, these are our challenges. These are concerns. How can you help us? So the center of excellence is a key area for many of our customers where they say, I have this device. I'm concerned that I might have some exposure if I take this to market, or I may have already experienced a security breach of some kind that I need help solving. And so we embrace that opportunity, take them into our labs. We do both hardware and software evaluations, as well as communication stack and layer, so that it's very comprehensive, and then get them the information that they need to be able to make the improvements. Whether or not they're using technology to do that, it doesn't matter. It's an independent lab. gives them the insight that they need. Other customers typically would come to us and say, listen, I'm chosen a particular BOM for this device. We've looked at security and we've decided that it's critical for us because of the sensitivity of our data and the threat analysis that we do hardware-based security, which really is under ideal circumstances the best way to do it. And then we take a look with them at, okay, so again, the threat analysis, what are you afraid of? What keeps you up at night? What's going to ensure your success? Let's protect that. And then we apply the correct hardware-based, or in some cases, software-based technologies in order to establish that root of trust that then becomes the foundation for all of the security use cases. Encrypt this, authenticate that, check the integrity of this data, encrypt this command, everything that you can possibly imagine to build a business impacting use case.
Gotcha. That's very cool. So when we're talking about different use cases that you all are working on, what are some use cases you wouldn't mind sharing with our audience? They can kind of talk through maybe not just obviously the use case itself, but how the security kind of plays a vital role in that.
Yeah, sure. So, let's take a look at one that's sort of already published and out there. We're working very closely with Core Connect on the Fresh Track project, which you know very well. The business problem there is that grocery stores are receiving shipments of fresh produce and meat and fish and things like this, where it ends up looking like they haven't actually been stored under ideal conditions during the entire transport process. In some cases, that's mechanical failure. In some cases, that's straight up fraud, where people have turned off refrigeration on a truck in order to save fuel and then turned it back on again as soon as, an hour before they get to the store. So the stuff feels cold, but it doesn't last 5 days on the shelf. It lasts 1 day on the shelf, despite looking fine. So by producing data with a flexible tracker that can be attached to each box or pallet, we can monitor the temperature, the humidity, the shock values for each and every individual type of product. But that data needs to be secure. It needs to have integrity so that if any party in the entire chain of custody comes back and says, hey, I dispute that data, then our security allows them to say, no, this data is trusted. It's cryptographically linked to the specific device that it came from, and we can prove that. It allows us to function as an independent third party, sort of trust authority, to say, here's a single validated view of the truth that all parties have to accept because the technology behind it makes sure that it's secure, has integrity, and is only accessible to people that have the right to access it. So that's one important use case that we're working on especially the U.S. Grocery industry with. But as soon as the COVID crisis hit, it became very clear, like we were talking about earlier, that same technology also becomes very critical when you need to know where your critical assets are and under what condition they're being stored. Our usual technology like Wi-Fi, cellular, et cetera, has a little bit of difficulty with positioning, especially indoors. So Core Connect is using some really innovative technology from one of their key partners to also do indoor positioning as well.
What technology is that? Do you know?
I'm afraid I'm forgetting the name, and so we'll have to maybe put that in the notes after the podcast.
Okay.
It adds a lot of value. Now the security factor there, of course, comes in where you don't want anyone to be able to intercept this data. And even if they do get a hold of it, you don't want them to be able to see it if they don't have access to it. So you provide access control using security. Mm-hmm. The confidentiality, the integrity of it. Can you trust the data?
Right.
There's a wide variety of different reasons why this needs to be carefully controlled and secured in order to make sure that the entire process is successful and that critical assets can get where they need to be. Especially in the kind of urgent situation that we're in today.
Right. So what about how does security kind of play into applications when it comes to insurance? So I know like in other elements of the world, like security and insurance kind of go hand in hand in some level or another. So I'm curious from your all standpoint, what are IoT applications for insurance when it comes to security and how are they connected?
So that's a really fun question because we're seeing use cases out there that we never would have expected. I think we all know, if you live in the US, the car insurance commercials that you see on TV, where if you use a particular app or a dongle in your car, you can get a discount. And that can only happen if the applications or the hardware behind the telemetry data on driver behavior is secure and can't be tampered with. So there's a really key requirement there for security in the car industry to be able to make sure that the insurance decisions that are being made are based on data that's correct. So that's one area. Another area that's interesting that we're seeing is product liability. And I can't go into too much detail on this, but the idea is insurance company insures a business against people having accidents on their premises. And the company needs to be able to prove that they've taken reasonable actions to be able to to create a safe environment for the customer. So whether it has to do with housekeeping functions or security functions or other automation within a smart building, they need to be able to say, look, this event happened at this time and we can prove it because we can take that to court. So with integrating our security into those type of use cases, what we're finding is that some of the people that we're talking to are able to get discounts on insurance from their insurance companies because they've been able to say, look, I have validated data that shows that these particular events to create a safe environment occurred at these times. So this product liability lawsuit will hopefully fail because they've done the due diligence required to create a safe environment. I'm being a little bit vague on purpose, but the more data that you have, and the more you can move away from, the actuary sitting in the basement crunching numbers that are theoretical to much more real data, the better off the business is going to be.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. As we kind of wrap up here, I wanted to ask there's a couple more questions more related to Kudelski and then kind of your view of the market. How do you see things kind of evolving over the next, let's say, 6 to 12 months in the IoT security space, and kind of what are you most excited to see or hope that happens?
Well, we're both excited and sad to see that medical IoT is something that's up and coming very quickly with a lot of security needs. So we're eager to help companies meet their needs in that area to be able to build secure devices with data that they can trust and devices that they can securely control from a distance. By the same token, for the first time maybe in history, we have people who are running power networks and telecom networks from home. So we got sent home as part of sort of these closed down operations, even though these might be essential services. People are controlling critical industrial systems from residential networks. And that really highlights a potential attack point. And we've actually started to see this a little bit already in our monitoring, where hackers are taking advantage of this crisis and the fact that so many people are working from home to execute attacks. So we think secure industrial control is also, and critical infrastructure control is becoming more critical, and building those security capabilities into the devices themselves.
Absolutely.
Instead of taking a cybersecurity perspective, the two of those need to be complementary to one another because there's a
that makes total sense. So the thing I want to ask you was on the Kudelski side, what's going on over there as far as any big news, anything big happening in the next few weeks to months that we should be kind of keeping an eye on?
Yep. So we have some good announcements coming out in the coming weeks about some of the things that we've been talking about. Exciting for us is that we have a new senior vice president joining us who's going to run the business, Hardy Schmidbauer. Very well respected.
We know Hardy too. He was a guest recently.
Yeah, exactly. So we're happy to have him. We know that he knows so much about, for instance, private networks like LoRa, et cetera. And really looking forward to have a new, fresh perspective from him to drive the business forward. I think the business has been in really, really good hands for the last 6 months with Patrick Howard, who's EVP of Iot Security. And he's kept the ship on the right course, adjusting it where necessary. And now I think Freddie's going to be taking over a really healthy and growing business.
Very cool. That sounds fantastic. Very excited to see kind of where things go there. But other than that, Christopher, I really appreciate your time. Been great to have you on talking about all these different levels of security. Great to kind of add on to the conversation we had many months back with Andrew Howard. So always love hearing from Kudelski. And so we really appreciate your time and your input into these topics. And we'd love to have you back on sometime in the future to talk more about security, maybe after COVID-19 and see where things kind of stand.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I appreciate the time and wish everybody within earshot of your podcast best of health and happiness. And I hope everyone's adapting to the new reality well. And we're here to help you to do that on the IoT
Great.
side.
Well, thanks again for your time. And we look forward to talking to you in the future.
Thanks. Have a good one.
You too. All right, everyone. Thanks again for listening to this episode of the IoT For All podcast with our guest, Christopher Schouten of the Kudelski Group. I'd also like to give another shout out to our partners at Softtech Development Corp for supporting IoT For All. Make sure you go check them out at softtech.com. That's SOFTEQ.com. I promise they are a fantastic group of people to work with and you will not be disappointed. But other than that, I hope you guys found a lot of value in this episode. I know I did. If you did find value in it, I'd really appreciate it if you would leave a rating or review on whichever platform you're listening to us on. Make sure you subscribe to our social media or our newsletter or even the podcast itself to get the latest episodes as soon as they become available. If you have a guest in mind you'd like to see featured on the podcast, feel free to shoot me an email at ryan@iotforall.com and we'll do everything we can to get them on the show. But other than that, thanks again for listening to this episode of the IoT For All podcast and we'll see you next time.